What is poppin' YouTube? Back again with another video. Today we're doing my must start, must sit wide receivers for week 5. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and let's go. My first must-start wide receiver for Week 5 fantasy football is going to be Ja'Marr Chase. Now, I know what you're saying, Caleb, but drafted him in the first round. Of course, I'm starting Ja'Marr Chase. We've even had some people being really concerned about this Bengals offense. When we're looking at Joe Burrow, he's still not recovered from his calf injury. But for me, Ja'Marr Chase, you don't know worries. You don't even have to worry about it because at this point, T. Higgins might not even play this week. And if T. Higgins doesn't even play this week, all the targets are going to be going to Ja'Marr Chase, who last week had 14.3 fantasy points, which wasn't great, but the week before that had 26.1 against the Los Angeles Rams. So Ja'Marr Chase is back, ladies and gentlemen. And I think this week, especially as Ja'Marr Chase and the Bengals take on the Arizona Cardinals, I think this is a great matchup for Ja'Marr Chase to absolutely smash. Start him with absolute authority this week. No reason to hold off. Ja'Marr Chase is my first must-start wide receiver. My second must-start wide receiver is going to be Cooper Kupp. Now, in my video yesterday, I talked about how Jonathan Taylor was a must-start, and there's a lot of people that are on the fence about these injured players coming off of IR. Well, let's be clear. If you've been waiting for Cooper Kupp, if you've been waiting for Jonathan Taylor, the wait is over. Both of them are looking and seeming like they're going to play this week. And even if Cooper Kupp is on a snap count, you still have to play him. He's still in my top 3 tiers of wide receiver. We're talking about him as a top 10 wide receiver this week. I know Puka Nacua has been good. Don't get me wrong. Puka Nacua has been absolutely amazing for a rookie wide receiver. But I think Cooper Kupp comes in and instantly slides back into that wide receiver 1 role. Not to say that Puka Nacua, just because he's a wide receiver 2 on the Rams, can't still be a top 10 wide receiver on a week-to-week basis. I just have Cooper Kupp versus his Philadelphia Eagles defense. It is a hard matchup for the Rams offense. So they need Cooper Kupp. They need Puka Nacua to even have a chance to win in this game versus the great offense that the Eagles have, but also the great defense that the Eagles have. So I like Cooper Kupp this week as a must start. I know you might be worried about the injury, but let's not forget last season, the year before that, averaged the highest points per game of any wide receiver, was the wide receiver 1 on a points per game basis each of the last 2 seasons, even though last year he did get injured and didn't get to play for you in the playoffs. Cooper Kupp is someone that I'm definitely starting this week as we head into week 5. My next must start player is going to be Garrett Wilson. We talked about him in our video yesterday, but we still have to talk about him again today. Garrett Wilson is going up against the Denver Broncos, who have pretty much given up the most points to running backs and wide receivers out of any defense this season. And so Garrett Wilson, even with Zach Wilson throwing in the ball, he is in my tier 4 this week. Garrett Wilson is someone that I'm definitely starting as my wide receiver 2. We saw last week him really get back on track with his fantasy points. It's sad because we were hoping for this amazing wide receiver 1 type finish season for him. And now I think really the ceiling for him is a high-end wide receiver 2. But Garrett Wilson this week in this matchup is definitely a must start. Probably put him in your wide receiver 2 spot, but Garrett Wilson for me, I am definitely starting him as a must start wide receiver. My next must start wide receiver is going to be DJ Moore. No, I'm just kidding. DJ Moore had an absolutely amazing game. Hopefully you did start him, but my actual must start wide receiver is going to be Hollywood Brown. Now, Hollywood Brown is going up against the Bengals this week, and we've been hesitant to really push these Arizona Cardinals offense up the board pretty much at all. And the thing that we need to realize with Hollywood Brown versus the Bengals is that James Conner we thought was going to have fantasy football value just based on the volume, based on this offense maybe not being so good, but Josh Dobbs has pretty much turned my whole opinion of this offense totally around. And so Hollywood Brown, Michael Wilson Jr., and Zach Ertz have all been fantasy football relevant on a week-to-week basis. So I think Hollywood Brown is easily a must start this week. If we look at what he's done the last few games, he's been in an absolute tear pretty much since week 2. 17.4 fantasy points, put him as a wide receiver 22, 17.1 wide receiver 20 in week 3, and then in week 4, 16.6 wide receiver 14 on a fantasy points per game basis. Hollywood Brown must start for you in week 5 fantasy football. Dude's about to still continue to pop off. He's been averaging a ton of routes, and even in week 3 when he only ran 22 routes compared to 46 and 30 in week 4 and week 2, he still put up 17 fantasy points. So I like the air yards. I like the target share. Hollywood Brown, definitely a must start player for you this week. Now, to your favorite part, we're talking about some negatives. We're talking about those must sit wide receivers this week. My first must sit wide receiver is going to be George Pickens, who goes up against the Baltimore Ravens. CJ Stroud had a pretty good day against the Baltimore Ravens in week 1, but I just think this Pittsburgh Steelers offense is absolutely struggling. And without Deontay Johnson on the other side, George Pickens, we're pretty much big player bust for George Pickens this week. I just don't want to be banking on that type of production, that type of catch to really propel his fantasy football value. I mean, if we're looking, he had a great day in week 2. Week 2, he had 22.7 fantasy points, put him as a wide receiver 11, but since then, 11.5 in week 3 and then 5.5 in week 4 against Houston. I think it's the struggling Pittsburgh Steelers offense. I think a lot of it can be blamed on Matt Canada. I think a lot of it can be blamed on Kenny Pickett as he's he hasn't necessarily taken those big improvement steps that we thought a second-year quarterback might. So I think George Pickens definitely is still a very solid option. I'm having him on my team. I'm just not starting him this week unless I'm in some super deep league where I really don't have the challenge. If it's like a 2-flex league, I'm probably holding off on George Pickens. If we're talking 3 wide receivers, 2-flex, of course you're probably starting George Pickens in that type of league format. So if you have any questions about starting or sitting George Pickens this week, let me know down below, and let's move on to our next sit. My next sit this week is going to be Drizzy Drake London versus the Houston Texans. Drake London has had more fantasy football value than Kyle Pitts. Shout out to Drake London for having that, but really it's been boom or bust. Can this man, he's been getting like 2 catches for 30 yards and a tutty, and that tutty is what has been holding him to have any sort of fantasy football value. And this week going against the Houston Texans defense has been sneakily good, and I just think Desmond Ridder absolutely sucks. It's at this point everyone's saying just wait until the Atlanta Falcons get another quarterback in there. I just don't know what quarterback the Atlanta Falcons are going to be getting in that offense that's all of a sudden going to propel Drake London to where you were having to draft him in, round 5. It's just Drake London is definitely looking like a fantasy football bust, not because he's not talented, but because of the offensive situation that he's in. So Drake London is someone that I'm definitely sitting this week. I can't bank on the touchdown upside. We'd like to see the volume. He does have the openness. If you look at some of the advanced metrics on Drake London, everything looks good. Everything points directly to the quarterback play, and that is what is causing Drake London pretty much now until the rest of the season to be sits. My next sit of the week is going to be Jordan Addison. Jordan Addison, we were talking about him last week in live streams, how Jordan Addison had the potential to become like an every week starter with that touchdown upside that he had, because he had a touchdown in week 1, week 2, and week 3. Week 4, what does he do? Absolutely puts up a big solid 0 on the board. And this week, the matchup doesn't get any better. The Minnesota Vikings are going up against the Kansas City Chiefs. So of course you're starting Justin Jefferson in this matchup. But if you have Jordan Addison, I would look elsewhere, especially if we're talking like a 2 wide receiver, 2 flex type of league. I think you might have some better options on the bench. Jordan Addison definitely is on the fringe. I do prefer Jordan Addison this week to someone like a George Pickens, but I do think Jordan Addison is still on the fringe. I would prefer to sit him just because it feels like it's touchdown or bust for Jordan Addison, even though he was getting those touchdowns earlier in the season. I like Jordan Addison as an upside shot for later weeks. I just don't like him this week. I feel like we need a few more questions answered in this Minnesota Vikings offense before we continue to throw Jordan Addison in our lineups to help us win and or lose weeks. In my last sit of the week, we will be talking about Jakobi Meyers versus the Green Bay Packers. Jakobi Meyers started off the season super hot with crazy target share. Jimmy G was looking for him almost more than Devontae Adams. Jakobi Meyers in the end of the first game gets that concussion out week 2. Puts up 15 fantasy points in week 3 and then had only 5 fantasy points in week 4. That's not going to get the job done. I just think last week especially he had Asante Samuel on him. It was a terrible matchup for the Las Vegas Raiders. Green Bay Packers have some really good cornerbacks as well this week. So I'm just a little bit hesitant to throw Jakobi Meyers out there, especially last week. He only had 4 targets. So maybe he bounces back and gets 8 targets. It's back to like somewhere in the 10 to 12 fantasy points per game. I just think that's hard for me to see this week against the Green Bay Packers. So I will be benching Jakobi Meyers. I think Jakobi Meyers is still a great stash. I think he definitely belongs as depth on your bench. I just think that amazing explosive week 1, week 3 that we saw, how many more of those weeks are we going to have? But specifically for week 5, Jakobi Meyers is going to be a sit for me. So if you like this content, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. We'll be back again tomorrow with some players that you must stash. So appreciate you guys for tuning in, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.